Hey there, it's Allison Meow. I got 3 stories from Reddit to read to you guys today, so here goes. This first one is called Offered My Home Intruder a Cup of Tea. It was submitted 14 days ago by D-Link Power on Let's Not Meet. This happened nearly 5 years ago now, but unfortunately the memory remains very ingrained in my mind. A bit of context to get started. I live in a medium-sized city that in 2011 was badly affected by a strong earthquake. Around 200 people were killed, and a large portion of the city's older buildings were either outright destroyed or deemed uninhabitable. One such building was the affectionately coined Mental Rehabilitation Center, Sunnyside. Naturally, having a significant number of mentally ill patients without a roof over their heads only exacerbated the city's problems at this stage, and short-term solutions were desperately in need. From my understanding, hospitals with the necessary facilities took the bulk of the load, while other temporary hospices and homestays were forced to become somewhat more of a permanent fixture, even if they lacked the security that previously would have been a necessity to house these patients. I would later come to learn that one of these temporary hospices was less than a block from my house. My house, along with the majority of the houses on my street, back onto a small creek, which runs through our suburb. It is relatively common for neighbors to wade down the creek to visit those who live a few houses along or on the other embankment, and virtually none of the properties have a back fence which would prevent access. So it's about 4 weeks after the initial quake, and things are beginning to return to some sense of normality. We're still being forced to use a communal portaloo out on the road, but in general, we are on the mend. It was a Sunday night, and I had gone to bed early because tomorrow was going to be my first day back at work in almost a month. At some point in the night, I later found out it was around 1:30 a.m., I began to stir as I realized the soft laughter I was hearing in my dreams was actually a physical, real-life laugh. It was very faint, childlike almost, a giggle. Sitting up in a dreary state, I assumed my brother had left the TV on in the lounge, so, dragging myself out of bed, I staggered down the hallway to switch it off. However, as I approached the living room, I soon realized that the laughter isn't increasing in volume, and upon reaching the room, I confirmed that indeed there is no TV or radio producing any sounds. Suddenly feeling a bit foolish, I make my way back towards my room where I hear no further giggling. Passing it off as my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks on me, I get back into bed and soon fall asleep. An hour later, I was again stirred awake, this time by the soft plucking of my steel-string guitar, which I keep in my office at the other end of the hall. No discernible melody, just random touches. Feeling very frustrated at this point for being awoken twice in one night, I immediately fling myself out of bed, determined to find the source of these irritating noises. Before I make it even 2 steps towards the door, the noise comes to an abrupt halt, and I realize that it was coming from my room. More perplexed than angry at this point, I whirl around to see what could possibly be producing this noise, and all at once I feel like the wind has been knocked out of me. Sitting in the corner of my room, cross-legged, on a puddle of wet carpet, is a large, shaggy man wearing soaked clothes and holding my guitar. A million simultaneous thoughts go through my mind at this instant. The obvious what the fuck, who the fuck, and how the fuck were very prevalent, but also more bizarre thoughts like, God, it annoys me when people touch my guitar without asking. All logical thoughts seemed to come to a complete standstill at that point, and for whatever reason, some deep-seated social cue came roaring to life, and my mouth sputtered out the words, would you like a cup of tea? Because, obviously the first thing you do when someone comes to your house is offer them a cup of tea, right? The man seems pleased with this interaction. He perks up and nods brightly. Finally, the rational part of my brain awakens from its coma, and I turn and sprint from the room, slamming the door behind me. I screamed for my brother to call the police while holding the door with all my might, dreading the desperate struggle that was sure to happen. There's a man in my fucking room, I yelled. He comes running, and once seeing the look of terror on my face, does not waste time in making the call. While listening to him give the operator our address and pleading with them to hurry, I hear a soft knock on the other side of the door. No sugar, please, the voice says. The word bamboozled comes to mind when I think about this moment. I fully expect to reach down, pinch my arm, and awaken from the most vivid dream of my entire life. The police arrived not long after. There were many patrols to deter looters around. My brother led them to me in the end of the hall, my knuckles turning white on the doorknob. After mentally bracing myself, I let go of the handle and leapt backwards, letting the policemen do their thing. They rushed into the room, tasers drawn, shouting at this home invader to show himself. Their aggression was short-lived, however, and I was close enough to see why. The man was simply sitting at the edge of my bed now, amusing himself by playing with one of my figurines. I think the officers were also taken aback by this as they halted for a second before continuing, a touch more gingerly. To cut a rather long-winded story short, and to confirm what you probably have already deduced, yes, this man was a mental patient who had slipped out of his temporary hospice and had waited along the river looking for houses to explore. Muddy footprints on my neighbors' decks confirmed that he had originally tried to enter their homes. I was simply the one foolish enough to leave his unlocked. The police took him away, and they later gave me a follow-up call to say that he had been put in a much more secure location, but that I should still be a lot more vigilant when it comes to securing my house. In hindsight, I believe this man was totally harmless. Ill, yes, obviously, but not malicious. There was ample opportunity when he could have harmed me had this been his intent, but he did not do so. He simply took my unlocked door as an invitation to come in. I did not press charges as I did not want to damage the life of an already damaged person. The incident left me pretty shaken up, excuse the earthquake pun, for quite some time, and I still struggle with falling asleep sometimes. But for the most part, I have moved on. There's one thing that I have not been able to let go of, however. I believe this one detail has left a permanent scar on my psyche. As the police were leading the man from my house, he uttered a short giggle, the same one I had heard when I was awoken originally. He said, "The man couldn't find me under his bed." The story is called Model Diaries. Maniacal photographer led me deep into the woods alone with nefarious intent. Submitted 1 day ago by Miss Romaine XO on Let's Not Meet. A brief background. I was recruited by an agency when I was in college, around the age of 19. I never had an interest in it prior to the agency offer, so I was an industry novice, but accepted the opportunity due to the earning potential. When I first began, all of my photo shoots, fashion shows, and promo events were coordinated through my agency. I will admit, I was naive at the time, and I had little to no background in the industry. About 3 months after signing with my agency, I got contacted on my personal email from a photographer who was interested in booking me for a shoot. It was odd, as I didn't have social media or have my personal email and phone number posted online for potential booking agents. However, I shrugged it off. Everything up to that point was all agency-based. The photographer was interested in building his portfolio and was offering $100 an hour for a high-fashion nature shoot, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually below industry standards. I was new myself, and also looking to build my portfolio and make some extra money for only 2 hours of work. Because of that, I agreed to book the shoot without the knowledge of my agency, because I did not want to sacrifice the 15% agency fee that they would take. The shoot was scheduled at a nature reserve about 30 miles from my university. Due to the nature of the shoot, portfolio building, the photographer was able to provide the wardrobe, but not hair and makeup services. I was sent images of the wardrobe beforehand and approved based on the modesty of the apparel. When I arrived at the shoot, the photographer met me at a common area and decided to show me the location he wanted to shoot at, which was off the designated trails. No immediate red flags went off because it was much more scenic off the trails. His camera, wardrobe bag, and a few reflectors were brought along with us. I followed the photographer. The assistant did not show up as initially agreed upon, into the woods. The further we trekked off the trails, the more nervous I became. About 20 minutes into our trek through the woods, the photographer decided to set up camp at a woodsy, remote location. He took out the wardrobe and expected me to change right there in front of him. The wardrobe looked nothing like the photos he had sent me. This was hardcore bondage apparel. Think skimpy leather and latex. In addition to this, his behavior was odd. I couldn't identify exactly what it was about him that made me feel uneasy, but my gut was telling me that something wasn't right. The first red flag was the absence of his assistant, and how unprofessional he seemed. I had worked with several professional photographers before, so I had a good understanding of professional industry etiquette. After about 10 minutes of arguing about changing in front of him, he finally gave in and walked deeper into the forest to let me change. I honestly had no intentions on shooting in that attire, but I needed to get him to leave due to the aggressive tone he began taking with me. I heard him cursing and grunting under his breath as he walked a ways into the wood to give me some privacy. At that point, I noped the fuck out, dropped the money and wardrobe, and ran through the woods to my car. When I finally made it to my car, I could hear him running and yelling for me. I tore ass out of the nature reserve and did not look back. About 10 minutes later, I got a text that consisted of a number of nonsensical numeric characters, and one that simply said LOL. When I got home, I saw one final text from him. He told me that I was missing out on a good time, and that he was planning on having a good time with me in more way than one. I called my service provider to have his number blocked immediately. This was before the days where you could simply block someone on your iPhone. I received approximately 20 emails from him about 1 month after the incident. I didn't open them and sent them straight to my trash can. Soon after, he completely removed all his profiles from industry websites. I had done research on him through Model Mayhem and One Model Place. I'm truly hoping that nobody had an experience like the one I had with him. And further, I'm truly hoping that he did not harm any other model who worked for him. I certainly learned my lesson after that, and have since gained an incredible sense of personal intuition. This story is called She Tried to Sell My Son, submitted today by AshGR613 on Let's Not Meet. This all happened within the last month. I have a sister-in-law who is a heroin junkie. She started on pills but switched to heroin as it is cheaper and easier to procure. I always knew she was a selfish, rotten human being, but had no idea how sick she really was until this. It started 3 weeks ago when I stopped by my mother-in-law's house with my 4-year-old son. He loves his gammy, and we had a few minutes for a visit. When we arrived, she was on the phone with her daughter and excitedly announces that little Jimmy was there to see her. She didn't mention myself being there and continued chatting for a bit. About half an hour later, I was in the bathroom when I heard my sister-in-law show up. 2 minutes later, I go into the kitchen where my son was supposed to be with his grandmother. No sign of him. I ask her where he is, and she tells me that her daughter had taken him out front to play. Noticing his shoes under the kitchen table, I snatch them up and stomp outside, annoyed that she didn't put them on him before going outside. I stepped out the door and see her boosting my little boy into a pickup truck. A man I don't recognize is behind the wheel, obviously one of her drug buddies, stringy, dirty hair, skinny, haggard looking. I sprint across the yard, grab her, and push her out of the way so I can scoop up my boy and pull him out of the truck. My sister-in-law immediately starts whining that they are just taking him for ice cream and why do I have to be such a bitch? I inform her that my son is going nowhere without her even asking, with one of her junkie friends in a vehicle with no car seat. She calls me a few choice names and takes off with her friend. I'm given grief from my mother-in-law and my husband for being mean to her while she's in such a fragile state. 2 weeks later, my husband gets a frantic call from his mother that his sister is in jail, again, and she has no money for bail. My husband does what he always does and heads off to bail her out. However, he finds out that her bail is way beyond anything we can afford, and over the next couple days, he finds out what she's done. She and her junkie friend borrowed the young daughter of an old friend to take out for ice cream. But instead of going to the local DQ, they take her to a crummy motel and leave her with a man in exchange for several $100s. As they are going back to the truck to go score with their newfound wealth, they are surrounded by cops with guns drawn. Turns out the guy in the motel room was an undercover officer originally trying to bust heroin dealers selling out of a seedy bar my sister-in-law frequented. I do not know how she came to offer him children in exchange for money, but the officer let her do it and set her up. Now she is exactly where she deserves to be, and I hope the judge sentencing her shows no mercy. That's it. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I'm still working on everything right now, and I'm still trying to figure out editing and stuff, so thank you so much for watching, and I plan on making probably a lot more of these videos because I really enjoy it. It's really relaxing and I like it a lot. So thanks again.